with me. So welcome to another edition of Driving and Ranting, which probably should have been the name of this show if I'd thought about it back then, but that is kind of what it became. Anywho, so we spent the first 7.5 episodes of this series dealing with a very specific kind of comedy that was very prevalent in the 80s. Regardless of what the series became, it started out as one of the, I guess what you call it, is a screwball adult comedy. I don't know if there's a better term for it. But those were very, very prevalent in the 80s. These very adult, very bizarre and raunchy comedies. But they were hardly the only type of film being produced. Along with those types of comedies, you see another type of comedy take hold and become kind of a real definitive type of art form for the time. And I guess the term we're going to use for these would be the high concept comedy. And dramas as well. We'll talk about a couple of those later on, but comedy is definitely where it felt like you could get away with a lot more in terms of what the audience was going to accept. Case in point, one of the big films to come out of the era, Ghostbusters. And that would be an example of a high concept comedy, something that had an internal mythology, an internal logic, all of its own. It had its own bent on reality, and something that I think they've discovered this in recent years, something that is very difficult to replicate in the modern era. It's very hard to take some of these films and some of their ideas and translate them to a modern sensibility. We don't think the same now. And it's not to say that high concept comedies and dramas don't exist, because they do. It just seems like in the 80s, they were a lot easier to find. And it seems like a lot of the films that have gone on and have had a life outside of the initial decade are those high concept comedies that stuck in our heads. So, why then did the high concept comedy thrive in that era? Well, I don't have any solid explanations for you, no evidence or proof to share with you. I can only kind of give you my impressions. And I think that one of the main impressions I have of the decade and of the media that it put out is I think that as a culture, we didn't question as much in the 80s. And I don't say that necessarily as a good thing all around. But I think if you look at the country at the time, particularly for lack of better terminology, the ruling class, i.e. the people that a great deal of media was being produced to appeal to. The 80s were a time of great decadence. They were a time of, at least, looking back on it, they were a time of wasn't everything great, wasn't everything wonderful, wasn't America just at the height of its awesomeness. Now, obviously, this is not true. Obviously, there were tons and tons of social, political, economic problems that are still plaguing us to this day. But the veneer that had been put over it and the shiny gloss that had been presented to the public. And again, I am stressing, this is mainly the public of, let's be honest, traditionally middle to upper class white people. You know, let's not try to sugarcoat this. That was who a lot of media was being created for. Not all of it, but a great deal of it. And for those people for whom the 80s were a successful time, you tend to not question why things are good or why things might not be so great for everyone else. Things are good for you and your immediate circle, so therefore they must be great for everyone. You know, there's a reason the 80s was called the me generation. And so you don't tend to question. Even the pieces of pop culture which could be considered counterculture, things like the rise of heavy metal and hair bands and whatnot. A lot of those bands, when we look back at them, what were they really singing about? Girls, 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 partying and having a good time. And again, not all of them. I'm not saying that this was an across-the-board phenomenon. I'm saying that a lot of it. So, again, when things are good, we tend to be a little bit more complacent, and therefore we don't question things quite as much. You give us a situation or a scenario that's a little out there, and we just kind of go, okay, sounds fun, let's go. Again, to compare this to the 90s and how much of popular culture was dedicated to questioning authority and scraping away at the veneer that had been plastered over it for so long. What was one of the big, some of the big television shows of the 90s? Well, The Simpsons, which was when it came out, and you kids today for whom The Simpsons have been on for decades aren't really going to get this, but when they came on, they were shocking television. They were the Family Guy of their time, you know, because they dared to say that the American nuclear family was not this wholesome, wonderful thing that the 80s TV shows had always propped it up to be. What was another big show of the 90s? The X-Files. Dedicated to saying, you know, the government is lying to you, they're using you, you know, there's dark, horrible things going on underneath. Now, again, the 90s had more than our fair share of plastic and disposable and, you know, for fun kind of things, but you can definitely see a difference in the mindset. And I'm going to say that, again, culturally, that's not really a good thing. Not questioning things is not a great plan, usually. But what I will say is, artistically, it did mean that we were willing to accept things that modern audiences will have a lot of trouble with. I think if you tried to play some of these movies for younger audiences, what you'd end up with is people just nitpicking the hell out of it. Why are they doing that? Why are they doing this? Why? That doesn't make any sense. And they're not wrong, but in the 80s, it did seem like we were able to kind of abide by the golden rule of Mystery Science Theater 3000 a little bit more.
Just repeat to yourself, it's just a show. I should really just relax.
So, while not asking questions is never really a great thing culturally, artistically, it did free up a lot of people to create some things that they might not otherwise have been able to do. Case in point, the topic of today's film, which is one of those high concept comedies which gives us as promised, a jive-talking, pop culture spewing robot, but also uses that opportunity, that was a weird way I enunciated that, sorry, to tackle larger issues or larger ideas like, what is life? What do we consider alive? What makes something alive? What makes something sentient? And that is the overall premise of 1986's Short Circuit.
I love the 80s. I love the 80s.
Alrighty, so let's talk about Short Circuit. Oh man, I loved this movie as a kid. I really did. This was a film that me and my friends would watch all the time. This one and the sequel, and even today, I still really love it. I think it's really funny and very endearing. But I can definitely appreciate it on another level now when you look at some of the questions it was asking and some of the institutions that it was lampooning a bit. Again, I don't think they could have foreseen how relevant some of the conversations it was going to have were going to be eventually, but nevertheless, I guess if you make something well, it's also timeless. So let's talk a little bit about Short Circuit. So, first of all, what is the story about? Well, in the distant technologically advanced year of 1986, robotics company Nova has developed a series of 5 robots that they are attempting to sell to the United States military as the latest in military hardware. Now, right away, we need to take a small diversion, and there's just some things I have to touch upon. Like I said, the 80s, we were very accepting of just about anything we were told in terms of the inner workings and logic of a movie, whereas today, with our CinemaSins kind of infested brains, where we tend to think every minor flaw or plot hole means that the film is terrible, it does mean there are just some things that I can't help but notice now that I was very easy to forgive then. First of all, if you are a younger viewer coming to this, you've never seen this movie before and you're checking it out now, I'm sure one of the first things that is going to strike you is that, again, the whole premise of this movie rests on these things are going to be used for combat and that they are the next big thing in military hardware. Again, this was not a foreign concept to 80s audiences, especially young ones. The ideas of robots being used as instruments of war was pretty common in a lot of our programming, from the Transformers to G.I. Joe. Towards the end of the decade, the Ninja Turtles would use it. A great way to have violence on TV without actual people getting hurt. But I think you will notice when you look at these things that these are not the most practical robots to be used for military purposes. They're rather large, they're rather awkward, they're clunky. They do not appear to be exceptionally stealthy, or they certainly aren't durable. as we will see throughout the film, bullets hurt them, and they can be taken out by a drone, by a helicopter strike. Hell, they can be taken out by mud. So these are not the most practical instruments of war that mankind has ever put forth, I think, is the point I'm making. Adding to that, it seems to me, upon rewatching, that the main military benefit of this robot is not actually the robot itself, but the large laser cannon they have mounted War Machine style on their shoulder. That seems to be the thing that does the most damage. So I can't help but wonder, they make a big deal throughout this movie of constantly mentioning how much each one of these robots cost, that they cost several $1 million each. I can't help but wonder, would it have been more cost effective to cut out a lot of that unnecessary robotic stuff and just mass produce the laser weapon? Like, wouldn't that have you could have made that into like hand weapons for soldiers or mounted them on the tanks or whatever? Did you need the robot for that? Just one of those questions that I have, that you do have to kind of tuck away in the recesses of your mind and go, let's just not think about that. La 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 la, the 80s. However, I digress. So anyway, back to the actual story. So Nova Robotics is presenting a demonstration of their killer grasshoppers for the Pentagon and a bunch of bigwigs trying to get money to build more. And at this ceremony, one of the robots, number 5 by name, is recharging before being presented to all these folks when suddenly he is struck by lightning. And in miraculous 80s logic style, the combination of that electricity and him being recharging and all of this other stuff has somehow completely reset number 5's programming and given birth to consciousness.
Number 5 is alive.
This is exactly what I'm talking about with just what we were willing to accept in the 80s and just how easily we were ready to accept it. Maybe it's because computer and robotics technology was so foreign to so many of us at this point in time. I'm sure for kids these days who can reroute the space shuttles with their cell phones, there'd be a lot more questions. But for us in the 80s, we were just willing to accept that lightning plus recharging equals life, and we didn't feel like we needed anything more than that. Like, there was no necessary, backstory or nothing else needed to be explained. Just got struck by lightning and now, boom, there you go, consciousness. I'm sure that's the same way God did it. Ali Sheedy puts it best later on in the movie.
How it happens, who the hell knows, but it has happened.
So yeah, nobody knows how the hell it happens, but it happened, and there it is. So through, in kind of a daze, number 5 ends up outside of the Nova compound and out in the world where he has no real purpose or idea of what he is or what's going on. By chance, he falls in with a good humanitarian, Stephanie Speck, who is like a lunch truck driver, who also has a soft spot for animals. Her house is overrun with them. She has the prerequisite 80s jerk boyfriend, or ex-boyfriend, I should say. And when she encounters number 5, her first thought is that he is an alien. Which, this is another point that I think modern day audiences might have a little bit of problems with, that you would believe for so long that this robot was in fact another life form, which I guess it is, but from outer space, something extraterrestrial. But she believes that he is an alien until she sees the Nova plaque on him and is ready to turn him over to them, until she tells him that they're going to disassemble him in order to find out what's wrong. And having absorbed a lot of knowledge, spending time with Stephanie, having read all of her books, having watched TV, number 5 is starting to get an idea of what the world is, and is starting to develop knowledge, and is starting to develop a personality. And he makes the connection between being disassembled and being killed, that if they disassemble him, then they're going to destroy everything that he has become or will become. And this begins the main thrust of the film, is number 5 and Stephanie on the run from Nova, from the doctor who created number 5, the chief of security who wants to destroy him, and nobody quite believing what Stephanie very readily does believe, that he is in fact a life form now. So there's your movie. It's a fish out of water robot learning about life and learning about humanity and misunderstanding common things. It's one of those kind of screwball comedies, but at its core, there are some very, very big ideas at play here, with one of the primary questions being, what is alive? What constitutes being a life form? And I think that is one of the reasons why this movie still holds up and why it is so beloved even now, is because it is one of the first movies aimed at a family audience that dared to ask those questions. I remember very distinctly, one of my fondest memories of this movie, or rather I think I should state why I remember this movie so fondly, is because it is the first film that I can remember that actually had me asking questions outside of the standard, well, why did he do that? Why did this person do this? Why did they go and do that? Standard little kid questions. I am not going to tell you that after viewing this movie, I was able to write a doctoral thesis on the nature of sentience and humanity. But I will tell you that it is the first movie that I can remember that I thought about in terms of the main ideas long after I had seen it. And the question of what makes something alive. I knew that I was alive, my parents were alive, we were people. People are alive. I knew that our dog was alive, animals are alive. But I always, trees and plants, they're alive, but they don't, they're not alive like we are. And so then how is number 5 alive? He's not a robot, or he's not a human, I should say. And all of these questions just kind of swirling around in my head, not in a mind-blown kind of way, but just in a, I never looked at it that way. And this is a film that, there are certain films that I've viewed, and I don't know if anybody else has had this experience as a film goer, but there are certain films that, even if the rest of the movie doesn't hold up, even if the rest of the movie is a complete dumpster fire, that there's a single scene or a single line of dialogue that sticks with me, that is so good and so well done, that it just permanently sets up residence in your head and becomes a building block for a lot of thoughts and personality development that's going to happen later in life. And for me, it was this scene, abbreviated obviously, between Newton Crosby, who is number 5's creator, and number 5.
I am alive.
No, you're not. You can't be. There's got to be another explanation.
No way, Jose. I'm fit as a fiddle.
Okay. Then why did you ignore your programming?
Programming says destroy. Is disassemble. Make dead. Number 5 cannot.
Why? Why cannot?
Is wrong. Incorrect. Newton Crosby, PhD, not know this?
Well, of course I know it's wrong to kill, but who told you?
I told me.
I remember that scene flawlessly, and the writing of it, the acting of it, the presentation of these big ideas in such a compact and easy to digest form. Again, this is a family comedy, so they understood that the majority of people coming to see this were going to be coming to see it with their kids. The humor is very much in that vein, not so much in the same way as, say, Police Academy, but still in that vein. So the fact that they had to kind of explain consciousness and self-realization in a way that kids would understand, I think they did a tremendous job. And there's a lot of cultural factors that we have to take into account. The 80s was a time where so much of our popular culture, especially popular culture aimed at kids, was built off of conflict and war. This was the era that brought us the G.I. Joe and the Transformers, and at the end of the decade, Ninja Turtles. Everything was built on a conflict. Good guys versus bad guys. And to have a movie like this that kind of came up and said that violence is wrong, and this is a very simple concept that a robot, a new life form, can understand, it's something that we also have to understand. Because a lot of those cartoons and even some of the adult entertainment, this is the era of Stallone, of Die Hard, of Schwarzenegger. And again, having a movie that very clearly says violence is not a good thing, that killing people is not a good thing, it's a tiny bit rebellious. Just the tiniest bit. I think it's also very interesting, again, looking at the culture in which this movie came into being. I don't think, and I've already touched on this, but I don't think that if you are under the age of 30 or maybe even 20, but if you're under that age, then you cannot understand what it was like in the 80s when technology first began to take such a dominant hold over everyday life. It was a slow burn, and I know for those of you who, we all carry, supercomputers around in our pockets. I'm recording this on a supercomputer mounted on my dashboard. We would never have thought that was possible back when this movie came out. But we were just starting to see computers becoming more prevalent, becoming more necessary for everyday life. It was a transition that, unsurprisingly, was met with a certain amount of caution and a little bit of resistance. This was a new thing. And it's natural to kind of be a little wary of new things. I do think that's actually not a bad thing. Being a little bit hesitant and being a little wary is good to a certain extent, because That's what keeps us from making dumb mistakes. You know, the same way people today are afraid of AI, we were starting to be concerned about just what could these computers do and what could they do that could potentially prove hazardous. If you need proof of this, look at some of the other media that handled this very issue. In 1983, so that's 3 years before this movie, we got the movie War Games, which we may cover on this at some point. I don't know. I haven't decided on that one yet. But this is one of the first films to talk about, you know, when all of our defenses are linked to these big computers that hypothetically the average Joe, a hacker, could get into, you know, what damage could that cause? And then we took a massive leap forward in this thinking in 1984 when the action sci-fi classic The Terminator debuted. This is a movie about a machine coming from a distant future where machines are trying to kill us, where we've let our technology run wild and now it's after us. So I'm not going to say that we were so paranoid that we were burning our calculators, but I do think that there was a certain amount of trepidation and concern about how much we were going to be relying on these machines and what that could potentially mean. And this is the first and one of the only films that I can think of, even now, that took a much different approach and said, you know, maybe these machines that we're going to create, maybe they won't be soulless monsters. Maybe we're the ones that make them the soulless monsters, and when left to their own devices, they can actually inhabit the best of humanity. Number 5 is a robot that does not want to kill, does not want to hurt, wants to learn, wants to love, wants to be a part of things. And the concept of killing or hurting something really does him, emotional damage. So it's one of these films that says maybe the products of our genius won't be these malevolent overlords that try to kill us. Maybe they might actually be better. They might be another step forward for us. It's kind of like the example I keep coming back to when thinking about the themes of this movie is always Star Trek. And not even with the Commander Data comparison, though you can definitely talk about that. But the fact that one of the reasons why Star Trek, when it premiered, hit so hard and why it was embraced so passionately even to this day is because it's one of the only science fiction properties out there to say that humanity is going to survive. Humanity is going to thrive. Humanity is going to find a way to put aside our more self-destructive tendencies and find a way to achieve our full potential. And that's why it clicked with so many people. And I think that's why this film clicked with so many people, especially in the environment and the time in which it was coming out.
Gnarly.
So we know that this film is working with some big ideas, and I think it is important to say, I don't know how much of this was intended by the filmmakers, how much of it was their purpose, and how much of it is just interpretation. But what's on screen is what's on screen. However, again, this is a high concept comedy. So how is the comedy? Honestly, pretty good. Does it hold up? I think to a certain extent it does. There are some things that don't, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit, but I think for the most part it is a pretty solidly written, directed, and performed family comedy. The humor is, again, it's one of the first examples I can think of, and I know there were others previous to it, but it's one of the first ones I can think of in my lifetime that I viewed that began using pop culture and pop culture references as humor, or as the basis of humor. Now, obviously things like Looney Tunes and, you know, the Walt Disney cartoons were doing that decades before. But this was now starting to use contemporary, what was at the time contemporary pop culture. And in a different way than we kind of use it now with things like Family Guy, where it's like, ha, that's a reference and that's a joke. You know, and I like Family Guy, but they do that a lot. But more in a very clever way. Because it does make sense. Number 5, of course, gets his humor from the Three Stooges, from TV shows he's watched. But it makes sense within the laws of this film that they have set up. This is a brand new life form that is getting its information from anywhere it can. And I'm sure we can understand this, especially now that the place where so much of our knowledge comes from is our media. It is the music, the books, the plays, the movies, the TV shows, and, you know, now the online content and whatnot that we create. That's where we start to learn lessons first. There's a reason Sesame Street works the way it does and still does to this day. Because that's where we first start to learn things. We start to learn things from the art that we are exposed to. So it makes sense that this robot would start to develop his personality, his likes, his dislikes, his humor, his vocabulary from the most prevalent form of media that was available at the time, television. So even though a lot of this is what would now be very dated references, they show you, one, where the references are coming from. You see him watching a movie and then later he'll do a callback to it, so you can kind of make the connection if you've never seen them before. So that's helpful. So it helps keep the movie not quite as dated as other films that would just kind of rely on modern pop culture. And it's a logical step in the development of this character and this world that's where he gets the beginnings of his personality. You know, there's a reason why kids of my generation all have their favorite Transformer. They all have their favorite G.I. Joe. They all have their favorite Ninja Turtle. And there's a reason why there were so many of them, or why the personalities were so specific and broad at the same time, so that kids could connect with one, at least one. And that connection forms our personalities as we develop, either for good or bad. So, yeah, so the pop culture references work really well in this film. I want to talk about the robots for a second, because I've already mentioned that, yeah, as military weapons, I don't know how effective they really would have been even back then. But they are pretty remarkable as puppets. These are huge, very technically advanced for the time, on-set practical effects and one of them is given the task of carrying the movie, of being the emotional core of the film. And that's really something when you consider just what he is, and not even like a puppet like a Kermit the Frog that can make facial expressions and you can get different emotions out of it. It's very difficult to do what they did with this this robot. And I remember seeing a behind-the-scenes thing when I was a kid on how they actually made this work, and it's freaking fascinating. So think about how many people are involved in creating the on-set performance of number 5. So you have one performer who is in this harness, right? It's like an exoskeleton. And it's a very early form of motion capture. So via radio control, everything this performer does with his arms, the robot mimics. So that's how he's getting the arm movements and all of that, is through this the one actor performing the upper body. Then you have another performer, and I think it might have been two, I can't remember, but they've got these huge, like, radio controls, almost like gigantic video game pads. And on these, I got all these switches and knobs and levers, and with these various buttons and levers, they can control the head. They control the movement from side to side. They control the eyebrows. They control the eyes. And then you have the voice performer. So the voice performer for number 5 is an actor named Tim Blandley, who is a very prevalent voice actor. He's done a lot of Muppet movies. He's credited as additional puppeteer and Muppet performer. So none of the big characters, but kind of when they need a whole group of them or some extra voices, he's there. Probably the other character he's most famous for is Frank the Pug from the Men in Black series. He did the voice for Frank. So he's tasked with providing the actual performance, the vocal performance for the character. And then they have to merge all of these performances together to create number 5. And again, when you consider that the robot does not have an expressive face, it doesn't have mouth movements or facial muscles like some of the more enhanced Jim Henson creations, it's very difficult, or not so much difficult, it's very limiting what they can do. So with these limitations, they create one of the most recognizable characters in 80s cinema. And one of the most beloved. People still love Johnny Five. And I know that today you could do this so much easier. You could do it with one puppeteer, or you do a motion capture, you get Andy Serkis in a green suit, or you get, some tennis balls that the actors act off of. I know you can do it easier. But there is something tangible. There is something more, dare I say, more human when you can see the effect on stage, on screen, I should say, and you know it was there, the actors were working with it, the actors were bouncing off of it, and could actually have it to reference. It makes the entire thing feel more real. I've said it many times, I will continue to say it, I will take a puppet. I will take a puppet Yoda over a CGI Yoda any day. Yes, there may be more that the CGI can do, but it can't feel genuine and alive in the same way the puppet can, being actually there on set. It just can't. And I'm sure the actors would have thought so too, and that's a great segue. Let's talk about the actors in this, because this movie is 80s-tastic when it comes to its cast.
Red.
So we have got kind of a who's who of 80s stars in this film. So we've already talked about Tim Blandley as the voice of number 5. Playing Stephanie, we have Ali Sheedy, so kind of one of the uncrowned queens of 80s cinema. The, brat packer, famous for The Breakfast Club and St. Elmo's Fire, the previously mentioned War Games. I always thought Ali Sheedy was kind of the Velma to Molly Ringwald's Daphne. She didn't get as much attention as the redhead, but I think she was just as good and had a different kind of energy. There are a lot of her movies that I really like and think she did a nice job. She's a little stiff sometimes, but no one's perfect. But I think she has a charming screen presence. But let's talk about the big one, because this is the reason I decided I wanted to do Short Circuit next in this series. I spent a lot of time in the previous reviews, the Police Academy films, giving shit to Steve Guttenberg. And I wanted to prove that I don't actually hate Steve Guttenberg, that I just thought that character and that performance was terrible. But Steve Guttenberg is Newton Crosby, PhD, the creator and manufacturer of Number 5 and his other robots. And this is a really good Guttenbergian performance. This is what I honestly would think this is kind of the quintessential Guttenbergian performance. This is him. This is a character that I feel fit him far better than Mahoney ever did. This is a sheltered, a little snarky, but good-natured and intelligent computer nerd. And that has Guttenberg written all over it. So, he is very charming here, and his charm is so much better and put to so much better use in this movie than it ever was in any of the Police Academy movies. And he and Ally Sheedy have a nice chemistry. He is not the only Police Academy alumni to be in this movie, however, because playing the part of Schroeder, the head of security for Nova, who is our antagonist, our villain for the film, is none other than our old buddy G.W. Bailey, also known as Captain Harris. And with this movie being in 1986, that means they made it kind of in between, I think, Police Academy 3 and 4. I think. There's not much to really say about G.W. Bailey's character. He's Harris. Basically, he's Harris without the incompetence. But he is basically that same character. It really is. And I just remember knowing that as a kid, is that's Harris right there. The only thing I do want to say about his character, excuse me, is much like my take on Harris from the Police Academy movies, it is so funny how your perception changes as you get older. Because obviously as a kid, of course you didn't want Schroeder to win. He was the bad guy. He was trying to blow up Johnny Five. But watching it as an adult, you can see that he's not a villain in the traditional sense. He's not trying to do something evil. From his perspective, he is someone who has a job to do, and that job is to keep a malfunctioning robot with a fucking laser cannon on its back out of the public. He's trying to protect people. From his perspective, that is what he is doing. Now, I know that he is supposed to represent kind of the short-sightedness of the military, the desire to turn everything new into a weapon as opposed to seeing what else it can be used for. So I get that he's supposed to represent the more negative aspects of humanity. But really, the character is just trying to do a job that you kind of hope someone is out there doing. If something goes haywire, you're hoping someone's out there who's willing to blow it up. It is just funny how much sensibilities change. Also in the cast, an interesting addition, another 80s standout, very beloved character actor, Austin Pendleton, who is in everything. He's one of these actors that you've seen him. He's been in a ton of movies, ton of TV shows. He is he's one of the guys when you see. You see him, you hear him. He's got a very distinctive voice, a very distinctive kind of basset hound kind of face. He plays the head of Nova, the doctor in charge. I know him best previous to this as the sidekick to the evil Doc Hopper in the Muppet movie, Max. But interesting, this is one of those fascinating things that you realize you put two and two together. He also had a he's still around as of this recording, a very prolific and successful stage career. One of his big achievements is that he originated the role of Mottelkonzoil, the tailor, in Fiddler on the Roof. I think that's awesome. Fiddler on the Roof is my favorite musical, so that puts him pretty high. And he was in the Muppet movie, so that's high on your nerd clout for me. And then we get to our other cast member, Fisher Stevens, who plays Ben Jabuda. And now it is time to once again join, I'm sure, everybody's favorite segment, How Offended Should I Be?
Wicked.
Okay, so in terms of offensive content or questionable, problematic content, Short Circuit is fairly tame. There's not a lot that I think you'd be ashamed or afraid to show kids these days. There's one joke about, indigenous people, which I think will fly over a lot of people's heads now, thankfully. But it's one quick joke, and it's pretty easy to overlook. But where this movie really kind of shows its age is in the portrayal of Ben Jamuda by Fisher Stevens. So Ben is our comic sidekick character to Newton Crosby. He is an Indian of Indian descent, and there's no other way to say it. I wish there was another kinder, gentler way to ease into this, but there isn't. This is a minstrel show performance. It really is. Fisher Stevens, from all the information I could find, and I looked, this is one I tried to do a lot of research on, because I wanted to see if there was anything I could find that could justify this or make it okay. But he is in no way, shape, or form of Indian heritage. And so what you have is a white actor in brown face. I don't know if they tanned him up or if he just naturally tans, kind of like I and my dad do, doing a fake Indian accent. And basically for this film, Ben's personality is he says things funny. He doesn't speak good English like us Americans. And that's basically it. That is his role in this, is to be Crosby's sidekick and to say things in a funny way. It's a minstrel show. It really is. And it's very uncomfortable to watch now, for me at least. It's uncomfortable for me because I remember laughing so hard at some of his lines when I was young, and laughing at some of them now. He has really great comic timing. But it's a thing you do, and then you instantly feel bad because, again, it's just so bad. It's an Apu. That's exactly kind of what it is. I'm not going to perform the voice or anything here, but if you need an example of what I'm talking about, think of Apu, especially early Apu from The Simpsons, and that's what you get here. And that's the whole joke, is that here's a guy who's not from here who says things funny, who doesn't know what one word means, or says a word and it sounds dirty, or he leaves out certain words. It's uncomfortable. It really is. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about this. I'm trying to divide this up a bit because we could have a whole conversation about this performance here. But I need to save some of it because Ben is going to come back and be our primary character in Short Circuit 2, our primary human character. So there's more to say about Ben as a character, but I don't want to get into it now. We're going to put a pin in this. I am just going to say that, yeah, it's really hard to watch this performance. It really is now. And I think it's important to say, I do not blame the actor. I don't blame the actor for the era in which this movie was made, because that was the comedy of the time. That doesn't make it right. That doesn't make it okay. But it's what comedy was then. So obviously they didn't think they were doing anything wrong, or, there was any problem with it, because everybody did this, And again, doesn't make it right, but just kind of says I don't blame the actor per se. So we have got more that we need to talk about, Ben, but we're going to save that when we get to Short Circuit 2. But just saying that for now, yeah, this is a bit rough.
Gnarly.
Okay, now that we have had the quintessential difficult conversation, let's ask the 3 big questions of the 80s movies.
It's the 80s. Do a lot of coke and vote for Ronald Reagan.
Invest in arbitrage and read J. McInerney.
Question number 1. Why did this movie endure? Why has this movie endured? And we've already covered some of this at great length. The big ideas that it put forward, the charming way in which it presented it, good performances, fairly tight script, smart direction. But I think what's really at the heart of this is the heart. 80s movies have a certain reputation, not an undeserved reputation, but a reputation for being big, bombastic, and in some cases just blissfully stupid. And again, this is not an undeserved reputation, but I think it is as indicative or as descriptive of the era and of the media that was being put out as Octopus's Garden was of Abbey Road. Just because there was some weird stuff and some stupid stuff and some just goofy fun stuff, it doesn't mean that there wasn't a genuine affection and a genuine message being presented. You look at some of the stupidest 80s movies. Let's look at the stupidest movie I can think of from the 80s. Rocky IV. Rocky IV is probably the most 80s film you'll ever see. But people love it. Why do they love it? Because it's impossible not to love it. There is a genuine love there. There is a real heart to it. A character that people love, and a goofiness that's hard not to just glom onto. It's the same way a hyperactive 4-year-old is adorable. That, yeah, it can be annoying, but it's also very endearing. And I think that's true of 80s movies, and this film is an excellent example of that. It's a jive talking, pop culture spewing robot, but it has heart. It's honest, and that kind of honesty can't be faked. So I think for all of the negative reputation 80s movies get, there's also a positivity to a lot of them that you just can't replicate. And when movies try, they fall flat. And this movie is one of the best examples of that. It has heart. And watching it, you still feel it.
Oh, man, please don't ever stop being the 80s or my life is over.
Does this movie hold up? I think it's kind of a 50-50. Obviously, a lot of the technology in it is quaint by today's standards. But if you can kind of remove yourself from that, and if you can kind of put an asterisk by the character of Ben as it was that time, it was that place, we were that ignorant, and try to just, shove that a little bit to the side, I think that the good story, the good writing, the acting, the practical effects, all of that still holds up. And one thing that is very true is that if a story is good, it will also be timeless. And regardless of the somewhat dated aspects of it, I think as a story, it does hold up very well, even if certain aspects of it have aged pretty poorly.
You and your 80s.
Your precious 80s.
You know, it would have continued to be the 70s if not for you.
Should this movie be remade? Well, that is a tough question to answer. I think that there are definitely places in which a modern take could prove interesting. I think that, especially with technology being as important in our lives as it is today, we have a lot of conversations. There have been a lot of movies about drone warfare, so I think that topic would be even more timely now than it was then. I also think that there are things that can be corrected. Am I the only one? I think I could totally see Ben being played by, say, Raj from The Big Bang Theory. It's that same kind of energy, only you actually have a person of that heritage playing the character. So I think that there's some interesting things you could do with casting, and it would kind of be interesting to see modern puppetry turned on Johnny Five and seeing if there could be any improvements made to the creature itself. But here's the thing. As mentioned in the previous sections, there was a genuineness and a heart to the movie, an honesty to this 80s oddball of a film that I feel would be very, very difficult to recreate these days. We're a little bit more jaded now than we were. And I think we see examples of films like this. I mean, the comparisons between this and WALL-E have been going since that movie came out, and not just in the design of the robot. But we have a lot of movies like this now, like The Wild Robot just came out, So I don't know if the exact heart of it could be replicated. I'm not saying it couldn't if the right creative team got behind it, but that would be the hard thing to really recreate. You could recast it, you could rewrite it, you could correct some of the more insensitive areas of it, but would it be as charming as the original, and would it kind of capture hearts the way the original did? I think that's a much, much harder act to follow. So should it be remade? I don't know if what we could fix would be worth what we would have to sacrifice to get it. So, not to say that there's not a possibility, just to say I think it would be it'd be more challenging than I think people would realize going in. So that's it. I guess the other question that has to be asked that I didn't include in the big three, but for younger audiences, for people who are new to these films, should you go and watch it? Is it worth your time? And I think, yeah. I really do think, yeah, you need to be prepared for some of the things that we've talked about here today. But I do think that it's worth the time. I do think it is a charming film, and one that really holds a dear place in my heart for starting me on the path to recognizing larger ideas at play in the things that I watched. Whether I knew it at the time or not, this was going to be a very important film to me and a very important lesson that was going to be pivotal in my development as a person, as a thinker, as an artist, as a commentary or a commenter on art. So, will it have that same effect on you? Maybe not, but it did on me, and I think I owe this film a certain amount of gratitude for that. So I would say, yeah, go check it out, and just have it with that quintessential grain of 80s salt that it was that time, it was that place. Okay, so there you have it. But we are not quite done with the Short Circuit universe. I don't know if 2 movies can be considered a universe, but we're going to for the sake of this conversation. So when next we meet, we are back with the Short Circuit saga. Johnny 5, newly rechristened, is back, only this time he's taking a bite out of the Big Apple. So please, 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 thank you for coming along with me, and join us again when we take a look at Short Circuit 2. And as we play out a small sampling of one of the other great traditions of 80s films is a banging 80s power ballad written specifically for the film. So enjoy that. So thanks for coming along, and as always, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.
Come and follow me to wherever the light breaks through. Come and follow me, and you're gonna be dancing too in your eyes.